1st, date of the Zoning Advisory Committee meeting of Hopkinton. And I need to read the script from remote meeting. Okay, there we go. So I'll start with that, and then I'll do a roll call, and then we'll get going. Good evening. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting may feature public comment, but not public hearings. For this meeting, the planning board is convening by video conference via Zoom app, as posted on the town's web meeting calendar, and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM TV through one of its many channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. And roll call vote. Please respond when I call your name. Ted.
Ted Barker Hook is here.
Sundar.
Sundar Subramanian, aye.
Rachel.
Rachel Rawson here.
Ria.
Ria McNamara here.
Ron.
Ron Foisey here.
I've got some alliteration going there. We don't have John. Who else do we have? Did I miss?
Curtis Smithson here.
Oh, there, Curtis. I didn't see your picture. There we go. There we go. Okay, and staff, we've got John.
John Gilson here.
And Mary Larson Marlowe here. So to give you a brief lay of the land, the planning board just voted to have a placeholder for a tree protection bylaw on the warrant for the town meeting. So we will be working the next few meetings on this. There will be a public hearing either March 1st or March 15th that will include this at the planning board. But before that point, we need to vote on wording for a tree protection bylaw, or alternatively, we can vote not to move forward with it. We can vote to recommend one of the drafts that has been submitted by town council, or we can make changes to it. Does anyone have any questions about the timing and objectives and so on?
Mary, I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm confused because I had read that the select board did not want to have a tree clear cutting bylaw worked on, and maybe I'm skipping over things that I didn't quite catch, but
no problem.
Fine.
So we did give the opportunity to select board to recommend this for the warrant, primarily because it didn't make it onto the agenda for planning board last week, and select board could get it on the agenda. We were hoping they would just take care of that, putting a placeholder in. They didn't feel comfortable because it was relatively new to them, and they didn't have enough time to feel comfortable that it had been vetted. But planning board then took the opportunity to schedule a special meeting earlier this evening. in order to take a vote on a placeholder. So, and it was not that select board necessarily said, no, we don't want this on there, but just that they weren't comfortable, that it had been fully vetted yet, which, in some ways it hasn't, because we're working on it now. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
sure, no problem. Okay, so rather than going through the draft bylaws that town council prepared for us, I wanted to break it down more to the nuts and bolts of this issue. I want to thank Curtis and Ted for doing a lot of research on this, all of which I've read. And I've, read the draft bylaws, of course, and we talked about this in Zach from about 4 months ago, but it was not until we realized that that the solar bylaw could not include things like this, things to protect trees and clear cutting of trees. And we discovered through our discussions with town council that that any such restrictions need to be applicable for all forms of development and earth moving and so on. And it cannot be restricted to just solar. So that is why we're taking it up right now. It is essentially a pairing with the solar bylaw that we submitted. But since we need to look at it from the perspective of all use of land in Hopkinton, we need to really examine how to make it effective without being too restrictive. Okay, so one point that John Gelsich and Elaine and planning board in general have recommended to us is that we do move forward with this requiring a permit. So it is not just a bylaw that says absolutely no tree cutting more than this percentage, and you can do it if it's more than this percentage. That it does have, that it should be, I should say, a permit situation, so that it can be more of a case-by-case situation and nuance can be used in the decision-making process. It does not have to be a special permit. That John can explain that to us later. I don't think we need to delve into that now, but that's their recommendation. So I saw, in reading over all the information, I saw several different areas of possible ways to go about this. One thing is, how much do we want to exempt? Do we want to exempt 1 acre? Do we want to exempt 3 acres of land? That sort of thing. What level of do we want to say a resident who lives on such and such amount of land really does not have to worry about this kind of thing because it's a small amount of land and it's really large clear cutting that we want to avoid. There's suggested percentages in terms of zones, of percent clearing allowed, but we also have to be very clear on what the areas that we're talking about. I found some of the wording in various bylaws, including the draft bylaw from town council, that was confusing in terms of, were they talking about percent clearing allowed and it was a percentage based on the total lot size, or was it based on only what was woodland on that lot, and so on? And I think it can be worded either way. It just needs to be clear what you're talking about. That's all. So that's, I think until we, decide on what area we're going to refer to, then we can talk about the percent clearing we think is reasonable allowed. But that's sort of the idea. And then the exemptions, obvious, some of them are pretty obvious in terms of dead and diseased trees, agricultural uses, and Massachusetts approved forest cutting plan, and then we need to decide on the lot size that would be exempted. So, and then just a little reminder that 1 acre is 43,000 square feet. Sorry. Some of the solar parcels that have been developed recently or have been permitted recently are here. So just as examples, so that you can picture in your mind what the land area that we're talking about. Okay. So I have a question just for the Zoning Advisory Committee, all the members of the Zoning Advisory Committee. What size lot, somebody in a neighborhood on a house lot, what size lot do you think should be exempt from details of this type of bylaw? Ballpark, throw it out there.
Well, I know from experience, if you try to develop today's typical house on a 1/4 acre lot, it's almost impossible to leave too many trees because the driveway, the garage, and the house take up most of the. So I would say it'd have to be at least above that. I know the one of the drafts had 40,000 square feet, which would be almost an acre.
Mhm.
I almost want to go to maybe a 1/2 acre rather than a full acre,
Okay.
in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree, through the chair, I would agree with Curtis. I mean, roughly under an acre, I feel is a good limit for an exemption.
Mary,
Yeah, Rita, go ahead.
sorry, did I jump in on somebody?
No, go ahead.
I live in a neighborhood like Maspinock where most house lots are less than an acre. And I think it's got more to do with the visual issue than the actual size of the lot and what it abuts to. And unfortunately, I live across the street from a lot that was completely clear cut for a house that was then going for permits to be built. But they clear cut like trees that were 100 years old on this lot. And the lot may be, I don't know off the top of my head, maybe 10,000 square feet. Really, that was not the point of the size of the lot. It was the quality of the trees and the hydrology that those trees lead to when you're on the downside slope of a hill with lots of water. I mean, that's a fact. It's like trees soak up water.
Mhm.
When you take out 100-year trees, large oaks or whatever, that really changes the hydrology and the soil systems all around it. So, I'm way more focused on not the size of the lot, but really the quality of the trees and how they affect the abutting properties and the nature of the neighborhood. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking at old trees as they become dangerous, because we should be looking at all trees.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Through the chair, I had a question.
Yes.
Just going back to what Ria asked. Is the intent of this to regulate the cutting of trees, period? Meaning, even if it's a single tree which is not in a disease state or something, I mean, would this regulation try to regulate that activity of any tree cutting by any private property owner would have to be regulated by this bylaw?
Question. Do you think it should?
No.
Okay. So that's what we need to hear more.
Yeah, the draft,
Yeah, we don't have to make it. We can give specific exemptions like that.
you know,
Okay.
one of the drafts included cutting for fuel, as long as it's like single trees. So I don't know, I guess we need to specify between clear cutting and minor removal.
Yeah.
I've been busy cutting up the one tree that fell on the other tree that took down the other tree. I've got 3 trees all piled out in the woods and
Right.
trying to cut up. And, cut firewood for the fire pit every once in a while, but it's not a, mow the whole forest down type of deal. So I want to leave the option of taking a few things out.
Right. So through the chair, maybe we could even start defining what we mean by clear cutting. Maybe create that definition and move from there. Single tree may not be clear cutting, but beyond a certain point, trees of a certain age or certain width or girth, maybe we should call that out as X beyond n number is deemed clear cutting, and then that becomes the scope of this bylaw.
Okay.
I'm just throwing this out there.
Yep. So clear cutting. At least in one of the draft bylaws is talking about removing a stand of trees. So it's more than one tree. And it's removing or causing to be removed, such as, damaging the roots extensively. So that's an important point, I think. But the percentages of the area is very much, clear cutting means what? It could mean you remove all trees, that's clear cutting. But if you haven't removed all the trees, then it's not clear cutting. So that's an issue with how we define this. That is part of the reason I was avoiding that terminology. But
okay.
But that is something that we can talk about, is like, what do we want to restrict? It's like a stand of trees that are all together. It may be a group of 5 or 10 trees, or it may be hundreds of trees. But cutting what percentage of them would be clear cutting in your mind? Or more to the point, what would you like to avoid?
Through the chair, while Sundar is thinking about that.
Yep, go ahead.
You kind of got put on the spot there, Sundar. I'm going to get you off the So at first, a really minor thing. I was doing a lot of reading, and there's a lot of stuff jumbled in my head over the last 2 weeks looking into clear cutting. So one thing I just want you to add to your notes, Mary, and I don't know where this goes. In reading about a story on the Holliston Medway town line, I think I forwarded to some of you that story. There seemed to be, when it comes to clear cutting, something about whether the cutters left the stumps or not. It's the developers were saying something like, we've left the stumps, therefore it's not clear cutting. I'm not exactly sure where that goes, but it might be something to jot a note down that we try to figure out later on. The other thing I want to offer is back up to big level for a second. And I'm really relying on everybody else in here to help me understand what the different bylaws are that we've put out there, that we found. It seems to me that there are roughly, first of all, there have been plenty of towns over the past 5-10 years wrestling with the clear cutting issue. We are not new to this. Therefore, town council can help us, because there's got to be plenty of precedent to help us through this, unlike the solar overlay question. It seemed to me that there were 2 routes that towns went. One, I'll call the Shrewsbury route, which is, in my reading, closer to what our town council advised, which is, if you're on a lot X size, you can only chop down X so many percentage of trees. If you're on this lot, you can chop down a different percentage. it seemed to me the other model was to have, sometimes called them protected trees. Duxbury, I sent out an email tonight with the Duxbury tree bylaw. They call them specimen trees, where they identified a certain size of tree that if you were doing a certain amount of cutting was protected and you needed permission to cut it down. And that's another way, I think, to avoid clear cutting, to say you can't just chop down everything. There might be trees that have a diameter of this, those are not protected necessarily. But if they have a diameter of this or this, you need permission to cut those down. And I think that second model might fit a little more with what Ria was talking about. It's not the size, it's not the size of the lot, it's the size of the tree and the job that the tree is doing.
Mhm.
The last thing I'd say, to go to the question you asked Sundar, is it seems that Wellesley keeps coming up, they have the strictest bylaw where it applies to any tree anywhere, as near as I can tell, if it is a protected tree, not just trees being cleared for development, but if you've got a tree in your own yard that fits the description of protected tree, you need permission and or you have to pay a certain amount of money per inch of diameter or something to chop down the tree. So I just wanted to zoom out to kind of macro level to what other towns were doing, because it might help us think through what we think is best for our situation.
Mhm. And I'm wondering, with the specimen trees, if we're thinking about protecting specimen trees, so the older trees, older growth, good quality, very nebulous term, but
although it is defined in the other bylaws, they will.
Yeah, I know, but we would have to define it.
Right. My guess is we would take a look at what the other ones are doing and
Yeah.
see what looks best to us.
And
If
but
we,
there's for habitat, when we're talking wildlife habitat, because I saw some other bylaws talking about retaining all of the trees in certain areas and all the undergrowth, all the vegetation undergrowth. Now, that makes complete sense in certain situations, but then in a residential development, it might not make sense to keep all of the undergrowth, and might make much more sense to just keep specimen trees. So it really depends on what we're trying to achieve here.
I agree. I just wanted to pull out to say it seemed to me there were two models. I don't think, though we do have time constraints, that we needed to be wedded to the model that town council put together for us.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah, I personally like the Lexington plan. I think it had a 6-inch, everything over 6 inches was protected. And I think some of the dogwoods and things maybe were down to 4-inch. It seemed to define what we're trying to protect fairly well. And also there were, I don't remember if it was Lexington or one of the others, some of them only really addressed what was in the required setbacks for like a residential lot.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
So I don't know if that's something we want to consider also. Where I am, I want everything that I can to keep me from looking at 85, out through the woods. I was in the middle of a, small lot residential subdivision. I may not want all the vines and stuff growing under.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to figure out exactly what we want to regulate.
That is true.
And do we want to go as far as, I think Lexington also had or might have, I've looked at, like Ted, I've looked at many of them. Whether we're going to require any kind of replacement or a donation to a tree fund to help replace the canopy that's lost.
Through the chair.
Another thing we would need there.
Yes.
One of them had for certain size trees, you had to replace them inch per inch. If you tore down a 12-inch tree, you could put 4 3-inch trees back to replace them, or pay that into the town fund to plant trees in conservation areas or whatever. And some of them over 24, you had to put in twice for each inch of diameter you cut down, you had to replace it with twice that number. So that would almost create a whole nother position within the town to manage tree replacement, tree cutting, tree replacement. So I guess that would be another thing we need to decide is how far do we want to go with it? Do we just want to regulate what's removed, or do we want to make sure that we're kind of keeping our balance of the trees in Hopkinton fairly constant?
And my personal opinion is we don't want to create this huge administrative nightmare either. That may require a full-time employee just to do this. So.
Mary,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious. I didn't do the research and I didn't read everything that came in. Was the general thought that 6 inches in diameter was the size that was really the benchmark for this protection?
That was one of the bylaws.
It was one. Was it more than one? Was it
Well,
like?
I think it was several of them, but
Okay.
but that was if they were specifying specimen trees, if they were defining those, if it was structured in that way, yeah. And what is your opinion?
I'm sorry, Mary. Rhea, my guess is that would be the average, 6 inches. It was often specified 6, a couple said 8, a couple said 5 or 4, some of them said depending on the type of tree. My guess is 6 was the average.
Okay, well, so then that seems like somebody's done obviously some digging to figure out like that's a good number then. The question that Curtis has brought up is, do we have some kind of a replacement program? And, the reason you would do that is, let's say you're trying to build a house and there's a 100-year-old tree in the middle of where the foundation of the house is going to be, because that's where it's located. And does the landowner have any other recourse? And that would be to, grow some trees or put into a fund for trees or something like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, because in other communities, I believe that's a normal, avenue. I don't know. Does anyone think differently?
That's exactly what Wellesley does.
Yeah.
They have a tree fund. I don't know how or who decides where to spend the tree fund money or where those trees are going, but my reading is that's exactly what Wellesley does. And my sense was you didn't need permission, you just needed the money to pay for your tree to come down.
Well, see, now I have a little difficulty with that, because I do know that when you have a very large commercial development and you rip out every tree or you cut down every tree, it can affect the hydrology of lots of abutting properties, and you have no way of, have recourse on it 2 years, 3 years down the line, because it's already happened. So, I struggle with that, and you know me as a commercial real estate broker. I mean, I really do want to see a marriage between conservation and commercial development, but it's really, it is challenging to see when a contractor just takes the easy way out every single time and just clear cuts everything. So, if there's a way that we could somehow be smarter about this and tie one to the other in a smart way. And Curtis has come up with some really great suggestions.
If I may, along those lines, the other thought I had is, let's say a developer wants to chop down the 8-inch diameter tree and then is told you must plant an 8-inch or 4 inches afterwards. 5 years later, that homeowner says, I'm not really interested in these trees. May I cut them down? What is the record? Who's keeping track of that? Who's going to say, no, those were there as part of the deal that the developer made to be able to build your house in the first place? There might be levels of enforcement that could be different.
Those kinds of trees should show up on the site plan when they get their permits. But unfortunately, we don't have a site plan review for houses that are within the bylaws. We only get, a look at these things if they're looking for some relief somewhere. So that's the only issue that I see with that. It's an interesting thought. Do we even have a tree warden? I'm not even
We
sure.
have an acting tree warden, which means it's somebody else, somebody's second job.
And we have so many beautiful trees in Hopkinton, so that's like overwhelming. I mean,
We do. And that's why I'm reluctant to go down the path of having something that will take a lot of time and effort to administer. My inclination is to exempt most residential single lots and focus on large developments. And making sure that those aren't just automatically clear cut before they even get to a point of a site plan review.
but Mary, but then what happens is that you have lots that have been the tree lots for the neighborhood for hydrology purposes. And once those trees go, now you encourage the water just goes where it's going to go. It's going to go to other people's basements. It's going to flood their yards. It's great. I mean, there's like a whole bunch of things that happens when you
I recognize that, you know, you have a situation right in your neighborhood where there was clear cutting, but my inclination is to see that people on their own land, their own lots for their houses are not inclined to cut all of the trees. I mean, there are some people who do, obviously, but most people are not inclined to cut all of the trees that are there and plant new ones.
See, I disagree with that because I saw the area of development for Legacy Farms. I saw all these trees come down because it's easier to do the development that way. And when you have single family house lots, they may not be very large, but they may be critical to the hydrology to the neighborhood. And that's just something that I'm knowledgeable about. It's not just because my neighbor across the street, clear cut and then went and got their building permits and left those big, huge, ugly stumps for a year as well. But, I'm just saying I've seen this in multiple places. It's not just this lot here. And I feel badly about what the possibilities are. Have I been affected by this yet? No, I haven't. I'm just saying that when the Price Chopper project did this, that there were a whole bunch of changes of the lots all around the Price Chopper. So this is something that you just have to be in the right place at the right, and have the water go the right way, and it goes where it wants to go. And unfortunately, old mature trees are being cut as a result.
Ron?
Mary, I'd love to support your approach of distinguishing between the residential and development types of situations, and at the very least in the residential side of things, perhaps grandfather existing property owners to some degree, and if we want to apply it to residential for new home purchases, at least the homeowners at that point would be aware of what the restrictions would be on their private lot. So I think separating the two makes a lot of sense.
So new construction only, not, is that what you're thinking?
Or a complete redevelopment of a parcel. I don't know at what level it goes from being maintaining a private residence to a development.
Right. And then a single lot.
Does a single family development in Hopkinton right now require any kind of site plan? If you
Does
just buy a lot?
single lot? No, it doesn't. John, can you, is an A&R, is it that, the right term for a single lot development, or is there different tiers, like just a single house being built, and then there's also an A&R that's a separate level?
So an A&R is really a subdivision of lots. It doesn't have anything to do with single family homes. They're usually used for single family homes. But I mean, you can A&R a lot for an office building if you wanted to. They would then have to, I mean, they would then have to go through site plan review or whatever else.
Right, okay.
So for single family lots, I mean, if there's a lot that's already subdivided and it's vacant and it meets all the criteria and it's got frontage on a street, they need a building permit, as far as I know, and that's about it.
That's right.
Through the chair, if I may.
Yes,
Yes, just I wanted to add that I agree. I would love to see the distinction between a new construction versus already existing house. Maybe we can include it in a category of like an exempt of up to 30% in an already existing. If you are a private homeowner, you don't want to restrict that much of, I can't touch any of my trees in my own yard. Nobody is clear cutting their own yards. Like I don't know if it's that bad of a situation.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we give a little bit of leeway for homeowners so that it doesn't seem like it becomes too restrictive.
I also believe that we're not going to get this approved by any stretch if we don't exempt some of the residential side of things. Smaller landowners.
I agree with that too. I think our goal is to avoid massive clear cutting. And that's different from a homeowner with a tree that is not in a wetlands protected area saying, you know what, this tree isn't working for my family. I admire what Wellesley did. I don't think we want to do what Wellesley did and make it as restrictive as Wellesley did.
There's a lot of things that Wellesley does that we don't need to do.
Yes.
Okay, so if we focus just on the concept of clear cutting, of large lots that that are going to have something developed on them, either a subdivision of multiple homes, or solar, or an industrial or commercial building. Do you think that going the route of, just a percentage of the lot should be cut or not cut? Or do you think we should go into more of the specimen trees, and the individual trees should be categorized and cataloged, and larger trees should be saved as much as possible? I'll get to you in a minute, Jane, sorry.
I think I'm leaning towards what I'll call the Shrewsbury model, but I think their law is a little different from what we're going for. As much as I like the specimen tree, we don't even have a full-time tree warden. I think the tree warden's job right now is only about trees along scenic roads and public ways. And to expand a tree warden's job into looking into a 5-acre property and agreeing with every specimen tree goes beyond what I think we can ask our tree warden to do or what we want to pay for. I think there's real benefits to that plan. I don't know if it fits what we have in place right now or what we want to ask the town to put in place. So I would lean towards the lot size percentage must remain trees. I like phrasing it that way instead of percentage cleared. I like percentage must remain untouched.
I like that. Okay.
You'll have to flip those numbers around though.
Yeah. Yes, I will.
It's got to become a 60, 35.
Yeah, no. I got it. Jane, do you have a comment? Jane, you're on mute. John, can you take her off mute? Oh, you're still on mute.
How's that?
Yes, yes.
No.
I can. Yay. Okay.
So while you're on exemptions, I just thought I would throw this in. Not only, well, I am a member of the planning board, that's true, but I'm chair of the Upper Charles Trail. And we have been charged probably 8, 9, 10 years ago by the select board to plan, construct, engineer, and design a you know, a multi-use trail from Milford to Ashland. And we've been undergoing this process now for many, many years. Over the years, we've been able to successfully convince the citizens of Hopkinton to purchase land that we think that the town will go through. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is there are also many parcels in town where we are actively engaged in gaining easements. So the property owner would still own the property, but we would hopefully gain an easement so that we can get our trail through there. So my question to your committee is, and I don't know how to phrase this, but how would we go about getting a 40-foot wide, because that's what our engineers are using now as a standard, 40-foot wide path that we can figure out where the trail will go, even though at the end of the day, the trail will only be 10 to 12 feet wide, but they need that to figure out where the trail will go, site design review. We need to figure out where culverts need to go. We need to go where bridges need to go and things like that. I can tell you right now that there are tons and tons of trees in this 7 to 8 mile path that we've carved out conceptually. So at the end of the day, if this bylaw passes, who then would go in and be responsible for the cost for categorizing all of the trees that are on this path that need to be removed for this trail? And who would pay for it? If in the case of an easement, if it's the property owner, would they be responsible for it? Or, you know, chances are if they're responsible for it, they're not going to give us an easement for it. So now we're looking at costs for not only the town in these private property owners, but also in the property that the town already owns.
So I
would
would
that
say
play
that's
into
a
it?
categorical restriction. I mean, exemption, you know, is
Yeah,
that trails, you know, and construction of trails that's sanctioned by the town. I think some of the bylaws, I'm not sure if the draft one from town council, but some of the other bylaws that I read today were exempted anything that the town was doing. So
Okay, so that's new information because I did not, when I've been doing the research, I've not found that to be so. But anyway, so maybe that's a question for town council.
yeah,
Could anything the town is doing be exempt? And secondly, if the property owner chooses to own the property, but they're giving us an easement, how would that work? Would they be exempt as well?
Yeah, typically the developer will be the one that has to get permitted for whatever occurs.
Yeah,
If you get an easement to run a sewer line across somebody's property, whoever's putting the sewer line in is responsible for, you know, whatever the requirements are. It usually doesn't fall on the landowner, or nobody would ever be able to put anything anywhere.
so in this case, it would be the town, because the town is seeking the easement for this trail that would ultimately be under the jurisdiction of the town.
Yep.
So I guess we would be asking for an exemption.
I think that's completely reasonable and within keeping to this, you know, the whole subject matter. You know, this is about having trails and wooded areas around the trails for the public and for, you know, for wildlife and so on. But yeah, clearing trees to construct a trail makes complete sense. And obviously, there's not going to be an overcutting of trees in that area because the
No,
people making
but
the
I
trails
think-
are not going to want to cut them.
Correct. So I think it's important to put in multi-use trails because that's the difference between backyard trails, going out of someone's backyard and going through the woods, as to what we are proposing, which is a trail similar to the Milford Bike Trail.
Right. Okay,
So it would be a multi-use trail.
good.
That would be great if we could get that in there.
That
Jane,
makes a
what's your
lot of
address?
70 East Main Street.
Thank you.
Mary,
Very welcome.
Mary,
Yes, Ted.
I like Jane's question because hopefully we won't need to build another school. But while I was thinking about this, I was
Right.
thinking about the marathon school and all of the trees that were chopped down for that. And I don't know if we could have had a school if we needed to buy so much more land to stay within a certain percentage of trees cut down. So I think it gets to the same idea. It's something the town, meaning the voters, agree is a good idea that ought to be exemptable. So I think it's a good point Jane raises.
Okay, good, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair,
Yes.
maybe a basic question. So when we talk about the town approved and all those things, so what Jane and Ted just said, could it not be the case that we could have a permitting process to allow cutting for, what we call public good or any project for that matter? Could we not have that as one of the byproducts of this bylaw to say that, whether it is town good or not, any project that requires this tree cutting would then have to have a tree cutting permit?
Yes, but again, we want to decide what is appropriately exempted. So if I want to cut one tree in my backyard, do I need to go get a permit for it? If the Trails Committee has gotten all the approvals, the funding and so on to create a trail and in a particular area through a corridor, is it necessary for them to come back and say, oh, by the way, we also need to cut trees, obviously, and need a special permit specifically for the cutting of the trees? And it doesn't seem like that's a good use of anybody's time when it's obvious that they would need to cut trees to do that work.
Okay.
That's kind of what we're trying to figure out is what makes sense. What makes sense to bring before the planning board or whatever other body to take their time to review something and then issue a permit for it. Okay?
Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this, the percentages, although they're nice to imagine, I wouldn't really want to see this much more allowed than tree cutting or clearing area or whatever. In reality, when I start to think through examples, it would depend on the lot size a great deal, and it would depend on the circumstances. And as Rhea said earlier, it kind of depends on the quality of the trees. If they're all really scrub trees, and so I don't know if it's really even useful to have zones and percentage remaining. So thoughts on that?
Sure, Mary, through the chair.
Mhm.
I think, and again, I've looked at a lot of these, so I am scrambled, but I think that at least a couple towns said, if you're asking to clear 10,000 square feet, this percentage must remain. If you're asking to clear 40,000, this percentage must remain. We can go back and look at those and see if that can give us some input. I can see that little chart you're showing, And
Mhm.
where it says percent remain untouched, break that into a couple columns for less than 40,000 square feet, greater than 80,000 square feet, or something like that might be a way to do it.
Okay.
And I don't know if those square footages are the right ones. I'm just throwing them out there.
Right, right, yeah. So, and that could give us something to talk about and see if it's reasonable. Throw it past a few people.
I don't think I've seen a town do it exactly like I proposed, but I've seen the chart we have in front of us, and I've seen a lot 10,000 square feet. You can cut this, clear this, a lot. So I'm just proposing combining two models that I think I've seen.
Okay,
Perhaps it might be a way to go.
yeah.
Madam
Other
Chair-
thoughts?
Mary,
Madam Chair.
go ahead, John.
Sorry, just quick one. Agricultural is technically a residential district.
I know.
That's how we've been interpreting it. So I don't know if separating it from the other residential districts will cause confusion.
So if I
That's
might,
difficult.
I will speak very briefly for what John Catino would talk about a lot. John talks about trying to change our agricultural to a residential, and it blew up a town meeting or something. I think we're stuck with those titles, and if that's what we're calling our zoning, we have to stick with those titles, as confusing as it may be.
But I think John is saying we don't have to separate them in the chart.
Ah.
We can treat them the same.
Oh, I see.
So,
So I hear. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me let you talk, John. Because
sorry,
maybe we're
just
still-
another quick thing. I don't remember where off the top of my head it is now, but there is some provision that in the zoning that agricultural is classified as a residential district, because I think it mentioned some provision or some restriction mentions only allowed in residential districts, and it's allowed in the agricultural. So I think
So,
like
If
there's
we
a
have an
disconnect.
exemption for agricultural uses, which was suggested, at least in one of the, I really don't know which bylaw. It was suggested in one of the bylaws. Then the agricultural doesn't really need a separate percentage that's greater than residential.
I would
So-
offer that I'd like it to, because I think although it's residential, our agricultural zone is much more heavily forested than our residential zones.
And
I'd
larger
like to keep
properties.
our agricultural zones heavily forested, and so have a higher bar of protection.
Right.
Larger properties.
But at the same time, then, we would also be pointing out that if you're doing agriculture on them in the
That's, right,
agricultural
that's
zone,
in the exemptions. That's
then it's exempt. Yeah. So, so it wouldn't apply. Okay.
Mary, I wanted to go back to one thing. We're talking about a tree warden that's got a second job, and I'm kind of curious. Why wouldn't this be under conservation? Why wouldn't the tree guidance permission be under conservation?
Yeah,
I
my
think
thought
I
was
get
that
John, how is it organized right now?
Are you talking to me or John?
John,
I'm sorry, how's what organized?
tree warden, who is responsible for it?
The DPW director is the acting tree warden.
Okay.
So conservation, the director of conservation, Don McAdam, who's just retired. Would that be something that this kind of guidance for property owners, you go to that department instead of the tree warden? I mean, could we organize it that way? Because it's a full-time job, not a part-time job / I think the reason why the DPW is there is for safety reasons along the roadways when a tree falls down, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now the tree warden really kind of only deals with trees within the right of way or diseased trees that could be in the right of way.
Yeah.
But conservation really is focused on wetlands.
But they don't have to be.
They don't have to be, but they kind of already are. And so I don't, it would be, I say that, but then the conservation administrator is also the staff to the open space committee.
Yeah. I mean, this really should go under the conservation department when we're talking about trees and the saving of certain trees and not other trees or all that stuff. I mean, even if we decide not to do it on the specimen level of 6 inches and above, and we talk about a percentage of the lot or something like that, I mean, conservation is the one that comes out and actually walks the property and says, yes, no, whatever. I mean, I live next to a wetland, so I've had them out here, but I'm just saying that if you're not next to a wetland, there still can be the ones that can identify the trees better than probably anyone else.
Yeah, I kind of wondered if it couldn't fall under additional use of the environmental consultant under Conservation Commission. I'm not real familiar with the firm, but it seems like they would have an arborist on staff that could serve as at least tree warden advice. If the conservation administrator, managed what went on with the guidance from, a arborist under contract, maybe that's a way to.
I don't know if we want to have a staff position on the town be part of a consultant's responsibilities.
Well, I mean, the administrator or DPW or whatever with guidance from a consultant arborist.
So when we recently did the site plan review for the road widening, is it Saddle Hill and Spring Street? I can't remember. John, for the with the state, with the bridge, the heightening of the bridge and the Fruit Street. Thank you. Yeah. So when we were talking trees with that, the DPW director did go down and review trees at planning board's request and worked with the designers on that. So, it's something that, I mean, again, this was within the right of way, but it was nonetheless, done by him for a planning board project. So, and that was to, try to save some of the larger trees along the way there. So there is a mechanism for it right now. I know that the full-time tree warden has not been in place for a long time. I assume, people talk about it being in place a while ago before my time. And it just has not been a full-time position funded in recent years. So.
I think I looked it up today. I think our last tree warden passed away in 2017, I think it's been semi-vacant since then.
Okay.
So I think if I am not incorrect, Joe Regan was the last tree warden because he mentioned it to me several times when he was on the design review board. I don't think
that's true because the article I read talked about Joe recommending the guy who passed away. I think
maybe I got my time wrong.
Ago.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay.
But just because this tree warden passes away, we shouldn't have a tree warden. I don't get that.
Yeah, this is not something that we can solve here today.
I know.
We can recommend it, but really our job is to create this bylaw and take it from there.
Right, but we were talking about the reason why the tree warden was an issue was because, determining the size of trees on a lot, before someone goes clear cutting was too much for the tree warden that doesn't exist because they passed away, obviously. So I was trying to come up with, why wouldn't that be like under conservation? Because trees are part of the conservation process, even though despite the fact that they concentrate on like wetland areas and things like that, the trees are still part of that overall conservation process. I don't know. Maybe I'm shooting up the rope. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all possibilities. But again, I don't think that that's the focus of what we're trying to do. how it gets administered ultimately will be, at the town manager level. And, we can make recommendations, but yeah, I just don't think that we can focus on that kind of stuff right now, unfortunately. So.
But Mary, what if you say, if you saw a tree that was a healthy 100-year-old tree and it just gets cut down as part of the overall lot with no one reviewing it, nothing happening? I mean, what would you think about that? I mean, I think that's part of, I understand that this is going hand in hand with the solar bylaw and we're talking about, big farm of solar panels or whatever, but I'm just talking about the tree that took 100 years to grow there. It's probably got some value.
I hate to see any trees cut. That's part of building things. Sometimes trees do have to get cut. If that's is right smack in the middle of a lot and that's where the house is going to go, there's really not too many options. But by the same token, I do think that we can determine how to regulate the larger, clear cutting of trees, including the large trees and the old trees. But we have yet to determine exactly how to do that. And so that's what I'm looking for is ideas on, should we do a percentage? Should we do specimen trees? Should we do somehow a combination of the two? Should it be no more than 50% and look at specimen trees over 12 inches in diameter? So that those can be identified and be part of the permit process. And then, whatever board needs to review these permits can see that there are, there's 6 trees that are over 12 inches in diameter, and see if there's a way to work with the developer to save those trees, for instance. So I'm just throwing things out there. So what do you think we should focus on? Do you think we need to do both? Do you think we need to do just percentages clearing, or just the specimen trees?
Well, so I go ahead, Curtis.
Just going to say, do you think it could be tied to the specified maximum lot coverage? Say I'm proposing this project, but the clearing is going to be more than what the specified lot coverage would be. That would trigger reviewing what you're clearing. That would help keep some setback protections anyway around the edges of lots. But that may not make sense. That's just something that popped into my head. So if you're only allowed to,
so it goes to a permit process. Yeah, if it's going to be
allowed to develop 50% of your lot, but you want to clear 100% of it, it maybe needs to be reviewed. If you're just going to do the 50% maximum coverage you're allowed, it's about right.
Okay, it's a possibility.
Except I don't think we were talking about anything by right. It was all by permit.
No, but I mean, what Curtis is saying is this is another avenue
Oh, okay.
we can consider.
Yeah. Rhea, my response to your question is I would be very sad if those trees are chopped down. I just don't know if we can micromanage to that level. And so if there is a way to save trees, I think I like if we can do it, because we still need a tree warden or somebody to enforce it. It would have to be truly exceptional trees, like the 12-inch diameter trees. I really admire what Concord and Lexington and Arlington and Wellesley did. I don't know if we can pull it off or sell that at town meeting.
Well, I think the reason why that Concord and those other towns did that is because they got to a point of development overall where they didn't have much open space, forested trees area like they used to. And, I grew up in Dover. There's more trees than people there for sure. But it's definitely a behavior of the government, of the who's trying to, what is important, what is the quality of life in the particular town. Do we point out the fact that an older tree of 100 years old with 40-inch diameter is of value, or do we just sort of say, you know what, you can't deal with that, I got to work with the bigger picture of like, this is a house lot, needs to have a house on it. I don't know. I've had lots of feedback over the years on older trees that were healthy, and what they bring to the quality of the neighborhood or of a development. I mean, if there's a quality tree there, you just want to preserve it. If you can't preserve it because that's where the driveway goes, or that's where the foundation is, or something like that, then you make some accommodation. You say, I think in any case, we should have some language that we should be protecting older trees on every lot to start. And that's where I thought we had in our bylaw to begin with, but maybe it needs to be emphasized. Maybe if someone is looking to do a development in a quasi, need a waiver kind of a situation, maybe they'll be more thoughtful about the trees that are quality trees. I'm not talking about the poison ivy that grows up in the undercarriage of the trees. I'm talking about the big trees that create the shade and the hydrology that really help, the neighborhood.
I think you would almost have to, in like the subdivision or site plan review process, specify a certain, say 12 inches or over trees need to be identified on the site. And you could change your lot lines to where, those are on lot lines rather than in the middle of lots. You would almost, to save the historic, older growth trees, you would almost have to take it back to that point where that could be looked at in the initial layout of everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that. I like that idea. So it doesn't have to catalog every single tree on the lot, but it catalogs the really important ones.
Yes.
Yeah, 12, 18, 24 inch, however you want to do it, because you can.
And obviously they have to be healthy trees and so on, because we don't really care about 12-inch trees that are dead.
Right.
And yes, and having them taped prior to a site walk by the planning board is also very helpful. Just whatever, they put something around it. Yeah, that makes sense. So, and we can discuss, whether or not the permit would be only for certain situations, or, that's obviously another step in the discussion.
That would go beyond the tree cutting or clear cutting permit and have to go into your subdivision regulations. But that would be a way to, as a designer, you would have to change your grading and your lot lines to, work around these specimen trees. If they're deemed to be a healthy specimen that's going to last for, 100 more years, then save it. If it's mostly dead, it's a Dutch elm and it's not going to last another 10 years, then, maybe it's okay to take it down.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could make it as complicated as we wanted to, but
Yeah.
I think we're trying to avoid that.
Yep.
I think just by having a builder or a developer come and talk about the tree and give the tree a little more, of a position in the conversation instead of cutting it down and then going, oops, oh, that would have been nice, because you can't get that 100-year tree back very easily.
Yeah, absolutely true.
But really, the only way you could protect something like that is to have it in the initial layout rather than have the lots all laid out and somebody comes in and says, I've got this 24-inch oak right in the middle of where my house has to be, it has to go. If you had considered that in the beginning and shifted your lot lines where it was on a lot line, it'd be a different story.
Right. So and the way we're talking about it now as another, a permit that goes along with certain site plan review and so on, it's not really a separate step, and I don't want it to be a separate step necessarily for the types of developments that typically do leave a lot of trees, like the open space. What is that one called, John? OSLPD or OS?
OSLPD.
OSLPD. So, you know,
Landscape preservation development.
yeah. So those typically, you know, are leaving a large amount of undisturbed woodland. And this, you know, I would like to see that this, this bylaw is written in such a way that it does not really add much work at all to an application process for an OSLPD, because, you know, they're coming in anyhow for the special permit and site plan review. And you know, we always do a site walk and things like that. So it should be relatively easy for them to look at this bylaw, say, oh yes, you know, we're covered in all these ways because, you know, we're leaving, you know, 60 or more percent of untouched woodlands, and you know, they'd be able to identify specimen trees and design around them when possible, but would be able to get a permit from planning board for any that they did need to take down. But it would be a limited number, you know, compared to the entire lot. So I think that that's important to do, because, you know, it's like they're already doing what we want in the OSLPD. They're leaving a lot of wooded area. They're making open space available to the public, you know, so all of those things are to be encouraged rather than discouraged with another bylaw. Okay, so I'm going to take some of our ideas, and I'm going to put it together with more bylaw language, but not quite as convoluted bylaw language. You know, more straightforward. Talk about the percentages. You know, we haven't really decided, but clearing of a lot or of an area to be built, to leave a certain amount untouched, not going to affect single building sites, so single housing sites, new construction only. So somebody on a lot with the house built who's not doing any extensive additional construction, if they want to take trees down, they would be exempt. They would be, you know, so we can discuss that more, but I'll put all of this into more of a bylaw format for us to review. Okay. And I'll talk to legal as well. Review permit. Okay. So, John, can you do me a favor and explain the difference between having just a permit versus a special permit?
Sure. So we do have precedent for just having a regular permit through the planning board, making it a general bylaw, and that's the scenic road bylaw, stormwater management permits under the stormwater, I forget what the title is, chapter 172. They're kind of more concrete in what they're supposed to have because you lay it out in the bylaw itself, right? For special permits, there's a little bit more that needs to go into it. So special permits have certain requirements. Sorry, I'm trying to think of what the words are. You know, not detrimental to the surrounding neighborhood, yada, yada, yada. in addition to the requirements that are set forth in the bylaw. As well, special permits are regulated somewhat at the state level. They have expiration dates, that type of thing. So you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of a regular permit, because you'll be able to set forth what you want in the bylaw itself, and that's what it has to hold true to. Special permits, there's a little bit from here and there at the state level in the bylaw, but generally they're the same. But I think you have a little bit more flexibility in the just permit rather than special permit.
So when you say flexibility, you mean flexibility at the permit granting authority level?
You have more flexibility within the bylaw. So whatever you say in the bylaw is what the permit granting authority will have to review the permit application on. In a special permit, it's basically the same, but you have just a few more little things that need to be reviewed. Like I said, detriment of the neighbor, how it interacts with the proposed work interacts with the surrounding neighborhood and that type of stuff. And then you've got limits in terms of expiration. At the state level, special permits are 3 years. So if you wanted to make a permit for 2 years, you'd have to do some maneuvering in the bylaw to make that the case. But if you have, for a special permit, but if you have a bylaw that sets forth just a standard permit, you can make it a year, you can make it 2 years or 5 years, or however long you want that permit to be. So it's little quirks and little changes that don't really affect the way that the permit will operate, but just some little things in issuing the permit, reviewing the permit, and that type of stuff that's a little different.
Okay. So I'm going to leave that. I'm just say it's going to be either a special permit or a permit. And we can discuss that more.
And one other thing that just I remembered, completely forgot, special permits need to have a 2/3 majority for a vote. So in planning board, if they wanted to approve a special permit, they would need 6 members. Usually permits are just majority, simple majority. So
Okay.
if something were to be controversial or you don't have a super majority of the planning board wanting to do something, that would make the process a little bit harder. But
Okay. That makes sense.
Yep.
All right. Okay. It sounds like, we're focusing on specimen trees, say over 12 inches. I would appreciate anyone doing research on the right wording without having a list of species in our bylaw, but to have some wording around types of trees. Health of trees is a different issue, but the types of trees is what I'm looking for more than that. If we have to have tree species, I suppose we will put them in, but I think that just gets into a lot of crazy details.
The only thing I've ever really seen excluded is invasive species.
Okay. Okay, and it doesn't sound like we're looking at the replacement of trees at this point in time. Anybody correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, even though it's a nice to have, it doesn't sound like this is one of those issues that we're going to deal with. Now, keeping in mind that for large developments, planning board is also talking to them about landscaping and screening and things like that. And this doesn't negate any of that, of course. Okay, exemptions. Obviously, there's a much longer list of exemptions. I just picked out the ones that really were, to talk about. So we may not do it based on square footage, but we're going to exempt residential single family lots. I'll need the right terminology from you, John.
Why?
we talked about that as being focusing on clear cutting and focusing on large developments because we want this bylaw to pass.
So the reason that's a single family lot would be the reason why it wouldn't pass, is what you're saying. What if the single family lot is a 5-acre lot?
Then we could put a square footage maximum or minimum.
I mean, what if it's 10,000 foot lot, but it happens to be in a specific area that would affect the neighborhood? I'm just throwing those out.
Because of our desire to actually have a process that we can get past at town meeting, we cannot get into that level of detail. I really don't think so.
So you think
I
it
I
has?
understand that you want that.
No,
but-
I'm just pointing something out to you, Mary. So you think that for the larger properties, you think that this can pass, but for the single family lots, it won't pass. I think I'd like to get some help from somebody on that one, because I'm not sure that really
Well,
will make the difference.
We did get some input from planning board when they put this on the as a placeholder on the warrant.
Okay.
Some of the input was, if people think you're trying to restrict their house, their yard, their lot, their property, and you say it's anything greater than an acre, well, what about those people on 1.5 acres or 2 acres or whatever? But if we're restricting individual homeowners' ability to do anything on their property, that's where we're going to get the pushback.
So what if we make the determination between something that has no structure on it yet?
Yes, we could do that.
Single family lot.
Yeah. So single family lot already built, and you're saying not single family lots that are not yet built out.
Correct.
Okay.
Could
So
you-
we can, yeah, I can put those options on and we can talk about that further.
Okay, thank you.
I was thinking if you set up a specimen tree, defined a specimen tree, anything over 12 inches, 18 inches, whatever. Say those are regulated wherever they are. And then restrict other clear cutting or removal to anything beyond the date of adoption of this. So any new work has to consider what percentage and whatever. That might be a way to keep whoever wants to go out and cut firewood, cut 2 trees down to get through the winter. They would be protected. If you had a tree on your property and you just got tired of looking at this majestic 24-inch oak, I want to cut that down, you would have to get approval to do that. But if you had a, falling down 6-inch pine, it would be okay to take that out.
Okay.
So define a specimen tree, regulate everything from adoption of this moving forward, but not really regulate, single family or what exists now.
Right.
So you would either need approval to clear cut, or you would need a state plan for forestry. But we want to protect specimen trees wherever they are.
Okay. Good.
But that,
Rachel, I'm sorry, I've been keeping you on hold for a while. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I actually had a question that was different than the current conversation.
Okay, go ahead.
So it was something I read about, if the state allows for a clear cut, then that's something that we would have to allow for. Is that just trying to get understanding? We don't have any say in that?
That's my understanding, is that if they go to the state and get a tree cutting permit or whatever they call it. John, do you have more detail?
Yeah, I think you're talking about a forest cutting plan.
Yeah, forest cutting plan.
Yeah, so that's something that goes through DCR, and it's not that the town has no authority over it. It's that the state approval will supersede other town approvals. That doesn't mean that they could move forward with their town approvals, but it's kind of the way that forest cutting plans work, as I understand it, is they can clear a certain area. There has to be justification for it, and then they can't basically do anything with that clear cut area. They have to let it grow back in its natural state. So while you're losing a lot of the trees, you're not changing the use. I think that's explicit in the forest cutting plan, is you can't clear cut to then change the use. I know a lot of people were scared about some of the forest cutting plans that they've heard of on solar properties, thinking that they're going to use the forest cutting plan to clear the land and then put more solar panels on. That would not be allowed under the forest cutting plan. But there is, yes. So to answer your question, there is something that the state has that allows you to clear cut, supersedes town approvals, to allow for this stuff. But there's some flexibility and some, I don't want to say negotiation ability, but there is some way to talk with the developers when something like this happens, and to bring it up to DCR.
Okay. And is it fair to say that even if we didn't include it in our exemptions, it's still state law and it supersedes us?
Yeah, I don't think you need to keep it in an exemption.
Yeah, it's there anyhow, right? Okay. Gary?
Hi, everyone. Gary Trenzel, 31 Chamberlain Street. Also chair of the planning board, but speaking as an individual here. And I've had to step away a couple of times tonight. So if I missed the answer to this, then I apologize. But I just want to make sure that we understand as well that just because we're requiring a permit, we also have to provide some language as to how we evaluate and determine whether or not a permit is going to be granted. So just like no cutting of specimen trees without a permit, but how are we determining when that permit can be issued and when it can't, I think is really important. And then secondly, just going back to Ria's comments, I think, you know, at the end of the day, I think that people get really nervous about zoning that is perceived to infringe upon their rights as property owners. And what I'd really encourage Zach to think about here is going back to what is the intent of what we're trying to do here, and let's make sure that the proposed bylaw is aligned with what we're trying to do. And so I get a little nervous when we start talking about limitations on single family homes. One, because that impacts a broader subset of people. Secondly, it's a harder message to deliver to somebody that, you know, maybe wants to build a house. We see these come through periodically where, you know, maybe it's family land or something else. And if the lot is relatively small and they can't clear enough land on it to build a house, those are the types of situations I think that make people really nervous. I'd also argue that those aren't entirely in line with what we're trying to prevent here, because what we're really trying to prevent is clear cutting of large parcels of land for commercial solar use. And so I don't know, I think that there is some truth in Mary's comments. I think that as it starts to impact a broader set of people, that starts to raise more resistance. You know, I also think we want to be really careful that the bylaws that we collectively put forth are in line with the spirit of what we are trying to do. And I just get nervous if we're trying to use this as a means to restrict growth and say, well, my house is here, so therefore I'm all set, but someone else that wants to, you know, clear a lot similar to mine can't because there's trees on it. I think that rationale starts to, will get a lot of resistance. That's just my take, but I don't know, just some thoughts.
Thank you, Gary. Okay. So we've talked through, I was just reading through this stuff just to make sure that we talked through most of what we had on here, but I'm proposing to put it together in more of a bylaw format, but a straightforward wording, and then legal can take it from there. And John and I will consult with town council in the next week as well. And then we can come back and review wording. And we may even be able to, let's see here. It's the first, just trying to look at the calendar. So, okay, now I'm in the wrong month. So, planning board next week. So we can't meet on President's Day, which is the 15th. But we could possibly meet on the 16th. And then we could also possibly meet the 22nd. That's not school vacation week, is it?
No, the previous week, the 14th week is the school vacation week.
Okay, so if people aren't available on the 16th, we can wait until the 22nd to meet. But my preference would be to meet on the 16th, and then we would have the 22nd as a possible other meeting time prior to the March 1st planning board meeting. So if we cannot complete the process on the 16th. So let me know if anybody is unavailable on Tuesday, the 16th.
I'm not available on the 16th.
Okay,
I'm not available on the 16th, Mary.
okay,
Madam Chair, we have a design review board meeting that night too.
okay. Is there any other day that week that might work, Ron, Rhea?
Wednesday or Friday would work for me.
Okay,
Wednesday probably is, unless we have a Board of Appeals meeting. Do we know, John?
There's Board of Appeals meeting scheduled for the 24th, so I would assume it's not the 17th.
Okay, all right. So that I could do the 17th.
okay. Can everyone else do the 17th?
Yes.
Okay, let's plan on the 17th at 7. And then the 22nd at 7 as just a tentative. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Okay. And we'll work hard in the meantime to try to put something together in more of a whole bylaw format. But thank you for talking through the big picture issues tonight. I would like to quickly
Mary,
review. Yes.
but I just wanted to throw something in, and I think that everyone on Zach knows this. And it's early, but since we have such a big audience, I want to make sure that everyone knows that whatever we come up with does not supersede wetlands protection laws. When we were talking about the zoning, the solar overlay, there were a lot of questions about, will this get rid of wetlands protection? And I just want to assure everybody who might be listening, it would not. All wetlands protections remain regardless of what we decide. This is on top of and in addition to.
Absolutely
I
true.
want to reassure the public that that's still true.
And what, just one last request to anyone who's joined us tonight who has an opinion one way or another about any of these details and how we structure it. Would love to hear from you. So looking at the minutes, we have minutes from February 19th.
January 19th.
January 19th, thank you. Has everyone had a chance to review? Anyone had a chance to review? They're fairly short.
It looked good to me.
Yeah, look at
Looked fine to me too. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
Thank you. And roll call vote, Ted,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Ria,
Yes.
Sundar,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
Madhu,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. So those pass. Did we have any other minutes, John?
So we do have the minutes before that. I didn't include them in the agenda by accident because they were tabled from the meeting before that.
So we can't do them today?
We can't do them today. I am going to
Okay.
add them to the next meeting's agenda.
That's fine. No problem. All right. Any other comments or questions?
A question for Ted as the conservation representative. Is any tree removal right now regulated by, if it's within a wetland area, it's regulated by conservation right now?
Yes.
Anything in buffers?
Yes, wetland and defined buffer zones. The town conservation laws are stricter than the states. Sometimes some properties are grandfathered in before the town rules were made more stringent than the state, the Commonwealths. But Conservation Commission only has jurisdiction over wetlands and wetland buffer zones. Yeah, I think that's, there might be some technical stuff I'd have to adjust in that answer, but that's essentially the answer.
Good. Thank you. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. And roll call vote. Ted,
That says aye.
Curtis,
Curtis, aye.
Sundar,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Madhu,
Aye.
Rachel,
Yes.
Ria,
Yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. I didn't miss anybody, did I? No? Okay, good. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Mary.
Everybody.
Sharing.
Stay safe, everyone.